Welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Loudmouth Luke, and today we're looking at an album that was very integral to my musical journey. Today we're looking at the debut album of Chicago rapper Lupe Fiasco, Food and Liquor. Before we get into this album, I need to add some context. When I first started actually listening to music, if you get what I'm saying, I almost exclusively listened to rap, with some small exceptions. And back then, I used to watch a YouTube channel known as The Rap Critic, who I still tune into occasionally. And through watching him, I found today's artist, Lupe Fiasco. For about a year, Lupe Fiasco was my favorite rapper. I loved his mix of lyricism and social consciousness, but for the most part, I haven't really kept up with him since about 2017, although I do occasionally spin some of his music when it comes on. This was one of my favorite albums in junior high, and it still has some classic tracks that I still love. With all that being said, I haven't really listened to it in full, probably since about high school, so I'm curious to see how it holds up. With all that being said, let's take a look at Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor.
Food and liquor stores rest on every corner, from 45th and State to the last stand in Henry Horner, J&J's Hill.
The first track isn't actually a real song, but hence the name, it's an intro to the album that kind of gives you an idea of what to expect from its themes. What I do think is interesting about this track is that first half is spoken word poetry by Lupe Fiasco's sister, Aisha Jaco, not sure how to pronounce it.
2020 rims, they rock braids, Air Force Ones and 10s. They drink Hennessy, Hypnotic, and 40s. They call their women hoes.
I did a little digging on Genius to get some insight on the track, and I picked up a few things. First and foremost, the themes of good and evil are emphasized through the title of the album.
They keep empty, west side lots crowded, hypes powdered. The well is running dry.
Throughout the intro, it sets the themes of misguided youth, doing things because they want to be seen as cool, which is further emphasized when Lupe comes in.
I got this philosophy, right? I think the world and everything in it is made up of a mix of two things. You got your good, and your bad. You got your food and your liquor.
It does what it set out to do, and it sets up the album pretty well. And up next is the first real song. Ironic choice of words, but the name is Real. And it's a pretty good track, and it's a really solid start to the album, for real this time. Similarly to the intro track of the song, it also shows off everything to expect from the album. Like the title suggests, the track is about Lupe keeping it real, discussing the real world and things that go on around you, and in some respect, Lupe's life and experiences.
Sometimes can override trust. She said that's why she gave it up. My man said blood spilled out of everything he touched. He crushed everything he crushed, ruined everything he loved. He just wanted to rush. Blamed it on the times being rough, doing dirt with the devil, chasing after the dust. Make a fuss if it's them, but we hush if it's us. That's why my mama said she wanted something real.
It shows off Lupe's lyrical prowess and social consciousness through these lyrics.
Life ain't meant to come around twice. Yeah, that's why I gotta get it right. They said.
Another thing I really like about this song is the beat. Despite being very mid-tempo, it has a lot of punch and a lot of energy to it. I think overall it's a really good track and a pretty solid start to the album, and aside from the introduction, I think it sets everything up pretty well. So let's see what's up next. Up next is Just Might Be Okay, and I love this song. First and foremost, that beat is awesome. It is just so epic. In regards to lyrical content, I think for the most part, this track is more or less trying to show off Lupe's lyricism, similarly to the last one. Although there are themes of housing conditions and the living conditions of people in the Chicago area.
Affirmative, no further furnishing is needed. I believe are completed, dig. We all in agreement on the wallpaper, happy with the color scheme. Welcome to the crib. A two-family habitat for humanity with a view where the insanity live. My vida loca was built like.
But upon introspection, it leans more towards Lupe just showing off his lyrical prowess. Either way, just like the previous two tracks, I think it shows off what Lupe Fiasco is about, a phenomenal lyricist that always tries his best to spread positive messages and address many issues in his community. It's another really solid addition to the album, and in my opinion, one of the highlights. And up next is one of my favorite songs of all time.
What up, y'all? Yeah, soundtrack, what's poppin', baby? Woo! Y'all ain't know, I go by the name of Lupe Fiasco.
Up next is Kick Push, and man, I love this song. It was one of my favorites then, and it's still one of my favorites now. Just like the previous track, the main thing that I first noticed is that beat. Those trumpets just hit you in the face, and they make you feel inspired and even confident in some places. I think honestly it could low-key be an interest song. It's just so good. Another thing that I love about this track is another thing I love about Lupe, his storytelling, which we will certainly get into later on the other tracks. This track tells the story of an aspiring skateboarder and how in many ways this character has found a way to avoid many bad things in his life from picking up a hobby like skateboarding.
In the story right here, but shorty didn't quit, it was something in the air. Yeah, he said it was something so appealing, he couldn't fight the feeling, something about it, he knew he couldn't doubt it, couldn't understand it, branded, since the first kick flip, he landed, labeled a misfit, a bandit, cocoon, 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 his neighbors couldn't stand it, so.
It's a super fun track and I always spin it when it comes on. It's one of Lupe's biggest hits for a reason. It's such a bop and the story is so fun to follow along to. And up next is another highlight. The next track is I Gotcha, and I really like this one. Just like most of the album, it has a great beat. The pianos and the horns always make me bop my head when I hear it. Funnily enough, this song wasn't really a favorite of mine when I first listened to this album, but it's a track I do really appreciate a lot more. This track really isn't that deep for the most part from a lyrical perspective. It's more or less a bragging track that's meant to show off Lupe's lyrical prowess, which a lot of the previous tracks have done, but I think this one does this job really well. With some of my personal favorite lines being,
they wanna smell like me, they want my bouquet, but they can't, they accent it like the UK. I warn y'all cornballs, I hush puppies. I love my city, really hope that God bless it. Have my mind moving faster than that hog in the hedges.
And of course, as a Sonic fan, I love that last line. It's another really great track, and up next is another great one. Up next is the instrumental, and I love this one. Just like most of the album, the beat is great, but based on the last few tracks, it has more of an emphasis on electric guitar and the piano in the verses. A lot of the other songs emphasize like trumpets, and I mean they do emphasize piano, but this one seems to use that in a more unsettling kind of way. Lyrically, this track is one of the more interesting ones, since the lyrics seem to be about a character dealing with some form of mob mentality or copying the habits of the box.
Just sits and watches the people in the boxes. Everything he sees, he absorbs and adopts it. He mimics and he mocks it. Really hates the box, but he can't remember how to stop it. So he continues to watch it, hoping that it'll give him.
At first, I thought this song was about someone in maybe like a gang or some group of bad people influenced by them. But upon introspection and looking at Genius, the box is TV. The TV influences these people to pick up, like, you know, buying this product or doing this and that. And it is meant to comment on how a lot of times media has a huge impact on us as people. And I think it shows those themes really well, which is further emphasized in the bridge of the song.
And you can't tell me just who you are. You buy new clothes just to hide those scars. You build that roof just to hide those stars. Now you can't take it back to the start.
It's another great track, and the next one is one I have very mixed feelings about. Up next is He Say, She Say, and I think it's a track that almost works, but the writing leaves a little bit to be desired. This track is about a kid acting up at school to gain attention from his father, who is acting very neglectful. I think that the first verse sets up the narrative really well, with the first verse being from the perspective of the mom, and it's a good verse, although the brother line is really lame and kind of takes me out of the story.
I want you to be a father. He's your little boy, and you don't even bother. Like brother without the R, and he's starting to harbor. Cool on food for thought, but for you, he's a starver.
And aside from the brother line, the second verse is literally just the same verse, but from the perspective of the son.
I want you to be a father. I'm your little boy, and you don't even bother. Like brother without the R, and I'm starting to harbor. Cool on food for thought, but for you, I'm a starver.
I'm not trying to say that Lupe is necessarily lazy for doing the same verse but from a different perspective, but it does make me wonder if this was a later addition to the album. It would have been more interesting to gain some more insight into the relationship between the son and the dad before he started acting out, or maybe even a verse that was the dad's perspective. It could have made the story feel more full, and I think in some respects it also would have maybe, I don't know, it feels like it's lacking a lot. Either way, I think it's an okay track, and the next one's pretty good.
Yeah.
Up next is Sunshine, and while I do like this song, it is one of the weaker tracks. I will say I think the beat is a lot more relaxing in comparison to a lot of the album, but I really like it. It's really chill. I used to fall asleep to this song. Lyrically, this track is about Lupe, or maybe some character that Lupe is rapping in the perspective of, meaning someone in the club that they're really interested in.
Fresh, yes she is. Had a feeling that it would be a day like this. The orchestra in my mind don't play like this, nah. But I'm prepared for it, got a little red for it. Brushed off my ears, even cut my hair for it.
I think that lyrically, this is one of the more forward and weaker tracks. Aside from some small stuff, there isn't really a lot of wordplay, or at least none that really sticks out to me, although I do like this line.
Never met her before, but I think I like her like a metaphor. It's hard to get.
It's overall a decent track, and next up is another highlight. Up next is Daydreamin, which notably features vocalist Jill Scott. The first thing about this song I want to point out is its choice of sampling. This track samples the song Daydreamin' Blue by I Monster, which Jill Scott sings along with in the song.
Daydream, I fell asleep beneath the flowers, for a couple of hours, on a beautiful day.
This track overall isn't super deep. It's about Lupe daydreaming about stuff on an afternoon. In the first verse, his daydream involves controlling a skyscraper robot, which, you know, awesome.
As a spy from behind my giant robot's eyes, I keep him happy cause I might fall out if he cries. Scared of heights so I might pass out if he flies. Keep him on autopilot cause I can't drive.
And the second verse is a satire of cliche hip-hop culture.
Come on everybody, let's make it cool. We need a few more half-naked women up in the pool. And hold this and it's all covered in jewels. And can you please...
Although it does calm down near the latter half of the verse.
Smoke machines and a simulated rain, but not too loud cause the baby's sleeping. I wonder if it knows what the world is keeping. Up both sleeves while he lay there dreaming. Me and my robot tiptoe round creeping.
At first I thought this line was meant to be about how many rappers Lupe was talking about have incredibly fake personas and in a way are only accepted by the mainstream by becoming a stereotype of their culture. But upon introspection and with a quick look at Genius annotations, The sleeping baby could be a metaphor for how the pop culture consuming public doesn't realize that these artists are fake and, by extension, don't realize the danger of this lifestyle. It's an interesting twist to the first verse since it doesn't have much to do with it, but, it's interesting. Regardless, it's another great track, and up next is one of Lupe's best.
Cool. Turn me up. Yeah.
Up next is The Cool, and this is another great track. First and foremost, this beat is another highlight. It's super atmospheric. It emphasizes the synthesizer and a lot of ambient sounds. It sounds really cool. This track is one of the best examples of Lupe Fiasco's storytelling, which tells the story of a hustler who was murdered and somehow brought back to life.
He came back in the same suit that he was buried in, similar to the one his grandfather was married in. Yes, he was still fresh to death, blamed 2 earrings, a chain laying on his chest. He still had it cause they couldn't find it, and the bullets from his enemies sat like 2 inches behind it.
This track also became the basis for Lupe Fiasco's second album, The Cool, named after this track and by extension the main character of the story, which I might look at in a future episode, but we'll see. It's another great track, and up next is another solid addition.
Stuff.
Up next is Hurt Me Soul, and it's pretty good. It's a storytelling track, but not in the way of many of the other tracks on the album. The story is about Lupe's experience with hip-hop.
Now I ain't trying to be the greatest. I used to hate hip-hop. Yep, because the women degraded, but Too Short made me laugh. Like a hypocrite, I played it. A hypocrite, I stated, though I only recited half.
Throughout the verses, he talks about disliking many of the things that a lot of rappers he listened to were talking about, but he couldn't help but enjoy the style of rap music and also the overall just emphasis on poetry and lyricism. It's a very interesting and, in some respects, introspective track. Also, in some ways, I hear a lot of the influences of some of the artists he listed in this song.
With pots, coupled with compositions from Pac. Not as it was written in the mix with my realities and feelings, living conditions, religion, ignorant wisdom, and artistic vision. I began to jot, tap the world and listen.
I think that overall it's a pretty solid track, and even though it's not a fave of mine, I do like that it adds some more personality to Lupe as an artist. Regardless, let's get to the next one.
Rockefeller. First
Up next is Pressure, and it's good, but not really one of the highlights for me. I will say I do really like the beat, although the Eagles in the intro are unintentionally really funny. Regardless, this track seems to be more of a bragging track for Lupe and featured artist Jay-Z. I do think Lupe's verses using gene making as a metaphor for rapping is really cool.
And so it seems that I'm sewing jeans, and first and 15 is just a sewing machine. So I cut the pattern and I sew it seams, and buttoning is hustling and publicly.
Jay-Z's verse is fine. It doesn't really add anything, but it doesn't really ruin anything either. I do think it was interesting Jay-Z was name dropped in the previous track.
Had to get a boy bop, a Jay-Z boycott, cause he said that he never prayed to God, he prayed to God.
And is featured on this one. I don't know if that was intentional, but I do think it's a neat little touch. Either way, it's a pretty good track, so let's get to the next one.
Close your mind.
Up next is American Terrorist, and it's another really good track, and it's one of the tracks that discusses social and political consciousness in its lyrics. The track talks about how our founding fathers are ironically terrorists for their treatments of the Native and Black people, and how their treatment still affects these communities to this day.
How do you forgive the murderer of your father? The ink of a scholar is worth 1,000 times more than the blood of a martyr. You came through the storm, nooses on our necks, and a smallpox blanket to keep us warm. On the fire department, they down here marching for freedom. Burn down ATVs, turn their TVs on to teach them.
Take two. And the overall frustration Lupe has with the way that the United States
Take
is.
you to heaven and let you meet the Lord there. Have become misinterpreted reasons for warfare. Reread them with blind eyes, I guarantee you there's more there. Rich must be blind, cause they ain't see the poor.
Plus, the chorus further emphasizes the themes of the US taking culture and land from others.
More money that they make, the more money that they make, the better and better they live. Whatever they wanna take, whatever they wanna take, whatever it is. The more that you wanna learn, the more that you try to learn, the better and better it gets.
I think it's a great track that truly breaks down the hypocrisy of many Americans, so let's get to the next one. Up next is the Emperor soundtrack, and it's good, but it's a little underwhelming after the previous track. It's one of the tracks that's intended to show off Lupe's lyrical skill, but there aren't really a lot of lyrical highlights for me. I do really like the beat. In a lot of respects, it reminds me of a lot of 90s boom bap, and I think that mainly comes from the drums in the track. Lupe's flow is the same throughout the track, and while in any other case that would knock this track a point down, for some reason it really works for me. Something about it just scratches my brain.
I told you I would show up, screaming out F&F till the world blow up. They said I was so finished, I told them it's show business, meaning there's no business. Let's fiascos in it, disrespect they dress code, wear my street clothes in it, measured, sold, and clothed in it, opened up clothes after I entered and drove.
Overall, I think it's another pretty good track, but in comparison to the rest of the album, I think it's a little underwhelming. Regardless, we got one song left, so let's see if it's a good conclusion.
Look at what we did. Came a long way from dirty ghetto kids.
Up next is Kick Push 2, and it's a pretty solid conclusion. There is an outro, but we'll get to that in a second. The rest of the track, like the title suggests, leaves the cast of the first Kick Push track right where they were left off, continuing to use skateboarding as a way to stay out of trouble.
The cops didn't find him for grinding, no. They kinda blew the vibe, figured it was time to go. Plus he had to be at home a long time ago, and he had made like $10 off the sign he wrote.
Although this part of the track is really interesting.
Took into the ribs, right past the pushers who couldn't underdig. What's the use of pushing? You ain't pushing none of this. If I kick it with y'all, I'm just pushing for a bid. But what was on his mind and push him to the lid? They best customer wasn't cooking for kids. Yes.
It shows that despite the protagonist trying to stay away from drug use in the street life, people in his life that he loves are still heavily affected by this. And in addition, another character is introduced to the Kick Push story.
Amongst the other things on his young black head. And see, his girl was a white girl. But just cause she was white, see, her life wasn't like world. She too had the drama thick. Had a daddy and a mama, but her daddy used to mama hit.
Based on the lyrics, these two form sort of a trauma bond in a way and try to make the most out of their circumstances, still using skating as a way to cope with life.
Just to show him how you kick, push over your shoulders, you swore you never looked. Cause wasn't nothing back there but the blackness. Life wasn't too attractive, yeah.
The beat to this track is also a lot more laid back and in a way acts more as a contrast to the original Kick Push's beat, since it adds more setting and shows more of the roughness of the character's life. It still has the same sentiment of using an outlet to escape your hard life, but it does it in a way that shows the hard life. I do wonder if Lupe ever plans on making a Kick Push 3 or having some kind of a conclusion to this story, but either way, this is another solid addition. It's a solid track and another indicator of Lupe's great storytelling.
Lupe Fiasco's.
I'm not gonna beat around the bush here, the outro is really unnecessary and way too long. It's almost 13 minutes of Lupe just shouting people out.
Yeah, much love to the F&F crew. Bryce, yeah, Gemini, Kane and Shayla G, Pro, Soundtrack, Jason Salvador, Simon, Bishop G, Graham Dog, G-Ball,
Like, I think it's cool that he wanted to shout everyone out, but it doesn't really tie into any of the themes of the tracks. It's just kind of there. You're not really missing anything if you skip it. Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor was one of my favorite albums back in the day, and it's still one I love to this day. From the storytelling to the lyricism, it's definitely a must listen if you haven't heard it. While there are a couple tracks I don't love as much as the rest of the album, it doesn't change the fact that this album is a masterpiece, and in some respects, an underrated gem. With all that being said, Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor gets an 8.5 out of 10. Well, that wraps up another episode of For the Record. If anyone wants to suggest an album for me to review, my email is lukeeboyer03@gmail.com, or you can message me on Instagram at loudmouthluke03. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have a great night.